I don't know exactly what we're going to talk about today. We're going to leave that up to you all. I guess the premise of this is question mark. We always thought that would be a good name for an app, and we may develop that someday. So you could just put any question about AE firm management in there, and it would give you an instant answer. Now, it may not be the right answer, but it would give you an answer. But no, so been doing this stuff a long time. I don't need to tell any of you. 38 years in this business, and have been an owner in probably a half a dozen different companies and seen a lot. And we do a lot of research, still work with a lot of clients. Some of the firms in this room, it's been a continuous learning experience for me. And then, you know, for the last 15 years, I've also been teaching entrepreneurship at the University of Arkansas. And that's really been a great learning experience for me, is getting out of the AE business and seeing how other businesses do things, because we're a little bit behind in a lot of ways in this industry of ours. You know, our marketing stuff is while we get excited about some of it, a lot of it's been done by other industries 15, 20 years ago. Same thing with, you know, some of the management practices that we're excited to put in place that have been used by other industries already many times over. I remember when the, what was it, TQM was the rage. And, you know, it was Michael Baker Jr. hires TQM director, spending $2.8 million on TQM next year. And it was going to be the saving grace of everything in our business. And, of course, about 2 years later, nobody had TQM. And but the point of it was American industry figured out back in the 70s it didn't work so well. They had a bunch of meetings and nothing really changed. So it took us 20 years later to figure that out. But anyway, so it has been a good learning experience working with you guys. The best part about the AE business is the people. I always tell anyone who comes into our firm or comes from outside the industry or who goes to work in one of our clients' companies from outside the industry, I go, you know what you're going to figure out eventually is there may be other places you can make more money or that are more exciting, but you're going to work with some fantastic people, and those people will keep you coming back every day, because we do have such an honest and well-intentioned and creative and nice group of people that we all work with. If you don't really realize that, just go to work for a contractor for a while, and you'll quickly find out that things aren't so nice on the other side over there. Pretty ugly, really, in a lot of ways. It is a lot different, it really is. So anyway, we'll just open up the floor to anyone, to any question or anything you want to talk about. Here's a round table. Let's just look at this as a round table discussion, and you're here with a lot of other people in this business who are successful. So we got a question from John McAdams. Yes, John? Oh, no. Okay.
What is it that motivated you to start this company?
You really want to know?
I really want to.
Well, I'll tell you. There were two things. One is I'd worked for two companies before, and I thought I was pretty smart. I'm not sure I was in retrospect, but I knew I would never be able to be the CEO because I was not an engineer nor an architect. But I loved the AE business, so you had to do something. I had to do something. I had to work for a company that sold what I did, okay? And what I did was provide management and marketing knowledge. But, you know, I'm not sure everybody here knows this, and maybe you don't even want to hear it, but the truth is I got fired from my job. I worked for Frank Stasiowski for 6.5 months. I was hired to work there to be the number 2 guy at PSMJ, and when I walked in the door, it was an absolute disaster. The first day, I had to go get myself some pads of paper and pens at Staples, and he said, we've got an account, or at the office supply store, he said, we've got an account down there, just go down and get what you need. So I go down there, and they go, cash and carry. I said, what's that mean? They said, you have to pay. I go, I was told we have an account here. They said, you guys don't pay your bills. Okay, and I thought, oh shit, now what did I get into? then, my relocation expenses were supposed to be reimbursed, and I lived here in the DFW area. I drive my family up there, had the movers, whatever, and we get up there, and so I turned in my receipts from my trip, and we stayed at wonderful hotels. At the time, it was like Ramada Inns or Red Roof Inns. Ate at Burger King, and he didn't want to reimburse me for my Burger King meal tickets. Then after that, coupled with the cut-off credit, I knew I'd made a mistake. And anyway, it was a really ugly situation. I had 7 of the guys' relatives in there. They had no information. I had to tell the employees that their pension plan was no longer in effect when Frank went out of town. The last thing that happened to me is I discovered when I was there, I got some business cards. So my business cards come, and the package of 500 cards was $180. I said, $180? That should be like $35, $40 at the time for the business cards I got. So I found out, I said, from now on, we're going to have 3 bids on all printing. We can't buy any printing. And we spent at the time about $400,000 a year on printing. Well, it turns out that Frank's wife's cousin, who worked for us, bought all our printing. Our printing was being bought by a guy who was best man at his wedding. Okay, so he had a print broker buddy, and that guy was either kicking him back money or whatever. But the bottom line is, when I did that, of course, he hated me. So then he turned Frank's wife against me, and Frank's sister, and Frank's brother, and everybody worked there. He didn't have a brother, but his father-in-law, and I had like 7 family members in the place to contend with. So one time he went out of town, they all went over there, and they said either we go or Zweig goes. So needless to say, it was me. And after I experienced that, when I did a good job, I turned the place around from a very bad financial situation in a relatively short time. And I said, I'm never going to work for anybody else again. I got screwed. I was doing a good job. I got screwed. That's it. I took a little walk. I walked down the railroad tracks. I thought for a minute about staying on the tracks. And then I reconsidered it. I called up Jerry Allen, who was my boss at Carter and Burgess, or my mentor. And Jerry's like, you want me to come up there and beat that guy up for you? I said, no. He was really ready to get on a plane and come up here and punch him out. I mean, it pissed him off. But no, I said, and Frank was an early client of mine because he knew I was capable. They became a client. And Carter and Burgess and VHB, who's another company that's on our hot firm list this year. And that really got me started. So that's a long story, but that's a bad employment experience, John. Yes?
You mentioned that you're teaching an entrepreneurship class here.
Yeah.
Any takeaways or anything you can share that kind of keep that same mindset, especially with your younger staff come in and try to help them as well?
She said, I teach entrepreneurship. Are there any takeaways or key things that I might want to impart on the employees of a company to have a more entrepreneurial mindset? Yeah, I think the main thing, there's a couple ideas I think are really important, and I think most of the people in here understand this one, and that is, the difference in a small business and an entrepreneurial venture is the small business exists so you can suck as much money out of it as you can along the way, and it may have no value at the end. And of course, a lot of firms in our business were operated like that. Some of us worked in those companies early on. The entrepreneurial venture, it's all about building value in the enterprise that someday when you leave, you can, cash in on that. And so that takes deferring your harvesting and reinvesting your grain, replanting. And it's a completely different mentality. If your goal is to really build, then, you've got to hire different quality people. You don't just find good order takers, you find people who can actually think and do things better than you. You have to have better systems, everything's different. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing, though, and I was just talking, we recently hired Bill Fox. He's here. He was the head of the Small Business Development Center on campus. And in fact, he and Tracy Jeffers, who also works for us, she also was in that job. So the local SBA guy said, would you stop hiring our directors of that center? But anyway, so we have a new one, and she's a former bank president. I had coffee with her a couple days ago. she was very successful in the banking world, and then her bank sold, and she basically got forced out. And so she ends up in this job as the head of our Small Business Development Center. And we talked about the common problems that we see. And, you know, for me, and my students work with small businesses. In my spring class, I've got 2 sections of a class, and they have to work with an area business or a business anywhere. Some of them are in their home countries or wherever. But they work with a business to increase revenue, increase profitability, reduce risk, and increase the value of the enterprise. That's the assignment, and they can use any methodology they want to do that. And they have to make recommendations to the owner and then report back on what the owner says. And so I've seen like 1,000 different companies in the last 15 years going through this with my students. And it's an eye-opener. And what I see over and over are common themes that cut across every single business. I've even had some work with engineering companies or architecture companies, or medical practices, dry cleaners, miniature golf play. I mean, you could go on down the line. Liquor stores, restaurants, whatever, manufacturing companies. The only requirement is the business can't be doing over $50 million a year, and it's got to be privately held. So anyway, I see the same things over and over and over. The companies that are failing, the owners take too much money out of the company every single time. They don't spend enough money on marketing. They're always underfunding marketing. And they have horrible finance and accounting, so they don't even know what works and what doesn't. You could see these same 3 things. Usually all 3 of them are present in the companies over and over and over again. And they, you know, and I could go on. They don't focus on their customer. You know, that was mentioned by Ryan earlier about, you know, client-focused business. We all say that. It's bullshit for most of us. But the truth is, it shouldn't be, because everything about that business should be designed to serve those clients. But you see this over and over again. I always like to tell the story. So one time, my last wife and I, it sounds like I've had a lot of them. I have had too many. Still paying for both of them. But so my last wife and I, we go out to the local Cajun place, and it's called Cafe Rue Orleans. And I call it Cafe Rude Orleans because the first time we went there, they were starting to close down, and the owner's like, no, go away, you know, like this. I thought, oh, what? Close. You know, it wasn't even like, gee, I'm sorry, we're closed. It's just, no, go away. Anyway, so we waited 2 or 3 years. We go back there, and we had dinner one night. It was pretty good. You know, you look around the room, everybody in there was a college professor. I think I knew all of them, okay? They were all like 40 to 60 years old, you know, sipping white wine, getting ready to eat their crawfish etouffee and listening to Sade on the CD player that's coming through the speakers. So we're all sitting there. But anyway, the second time I go, they don't have a room for us. They said, you can go down to the bar and we'll call you when your table's ready. So the place is on 2 levels. It's got a ground level and it's got a second story. The restaurant's on the second story, but it's a very hilly site that it's on. You walk in it at the grade on the second story. So we go in. So anyway, I said, well, how do we get down to the bar? I thought, well, naturally, there's a stairway in this place. You got to go outside. So it's cold and it's slippery, and my wife is like slipping down the parking lot in her heels as we get down to this bar down below. I expect to go down there and see other yuppies, you know, drinking their white wine and listening to Sade. And instead, what's down there is a bar where there's a bartender who's about a 25-year-old guy smoking Marlboros, ashtrays, dirty ashtrays on every table, the game playing real loud in the background, crushed cans of Budweiser, okay, on my table. Nobody cleans it off. Nobody waits on us or anything. Finally, I go up there and I order some drinks. I said, you know, I thought I'd gone into like some kind of a weird dimension change or something. This is not the same restaurant, is it? But it is, because they didn't understand who their freaking customer was. Then nobody was in this dump because all the yuppies would rather be upstairs. But, you know, it's, do you understand who your customer base is? And I see it over and over and over with businesses. I got a student, he started up a very upmarket taco business. So where does he locate it? Locates over by the high school where you got nothing but high school students. None of us go over there for lunch because it's a terrible location. He didn't think about where do the people that he's aiming at who will pay twice as much for a taco as you can get at the other taco places in town. They're not over there by the high school because he wasn't focusing on who his clients were or customers were. So I see the same thing out there in the AE firms we work for. You know, and I see this mistake made over and over again. But anyway, that's a long, forgive that tirade on what some of the things I see are. But there are some big differences and some important things people need to learn. I think the other thing that, you hear a lot of today is, failure's good. I hear this all the time. I had some guy come in my class, and he says, if you're ever going to be a millionaire, you're going to go broke at least once. So I called him out in the hall. I said, don't tell my students that shit. You go broke, you hurt a lot of people. Our goal is to not go broke, okay? It's a very simple idea. Today, it's all, failure's great, fail a lot. Fail, Susie, fail, okay? We just can't fail all the time. I mean, we're going to run out of money and friends and people who, will give us money. I mean, it's a ludicrous idea. I mean, I think our goal should be to avoid. You can learn a lot from failure. Yes, you can, but guess what? Maybe you don't have to learn that if you succeed. I mean, I know that sounds terrible, but it absolutely drives me crazy when I hear failure's good. And, and of course, the guy is now our leading startup expert in our entrepreneurial ecosystem in Northwest Arkansas. He's got a company, Startup Junkie. What did you do for a living before? I was in the military. Okay, and then what did you do? Well, I was a minor member of 2 startups. They both failed. I got fired, and then I went to work for the University of Arkansas. And now I'm an Entrepreneur of the Year, according to the Business Journal, but my company gets all its money from the Rockefeller Foundation and the city of Fayetteville and the Northwest Arkansas Chamber of Commerce. It's all grant money. What the hell do you know about starting companies, okay? You've never done anything that ever worked right. So, but he is every single day in the newspaper, there's the entrepreneurship expert in startups. So I guess the other thing is be careful of the information you get and who you're getting it from. Find out if it's any good. Because there's a lot of bad information out there on business and entrepreneurship. It's purveyed by a lot of people who haven't been successful. Yes, Steve?
Talk about how as a founder and a CEO, you constantly replace yourself. I think it's, in all these businesses, on the building side, but I see it on the nonprofit side, I see it the founder who can't replace him or herself and limits the growth and development of the company in their life.
That is a small business problem too. The control freak, I'm better than everybody else. No one's as good at me as me at this or that, so therefore I can't ever pass the reins. Huge problem. I mean, first off, don't replace yourself. Get somebody else who's better than yourself. Nobody's going to be exactly like me. I think that's the problem with a lot of founders. They're out looking for somebody who's just like them. And you're never going to find anybody who's just like you. So they never find anybody just like them, so they never do anything. So the place rises and falls with them. The business has to evolve. And so it may be 3 people, or it may be 1 person, but they're different than you. And you match them up with some other people. I think the barrier to all of it is your ego. It's only recently that my ego is finally getting in check enough to start actually doing things that I think will be better for me in the long run, if that makes sense. You just, it takes a conscious effort. And you got to have a little bit of faith in people. And, nobody's as good at you, as good as you are, maybe, at doing something at first, but give them a chance and maybe they'll be better. That's what I found. It's worked out if you pick the right people. And, fortunately in my case, that's one thing I think I can do fairly well, is pick people. And I do it because I look for people who have a good work ethic and who are honest and intelligent, and basically they can learn anything. You know, if you have too many narrow requirements about their technical background or their particular history and their role or whatever, then I think you're more likely to make a mistake because you forget those other things are really more important. Yes?
Kind of follow along those lines a little bit. You know, a lot of leaders in engineering firms or tech firms come up from production ranks in some fashion, right?
Sure.
And you mentioned earlier, you know, maybe you need to get outside of your business and look how the business is operating. And then you also said, you know, you knew you couldn't be CEO because you weren't.
Right.
I'm curious, as you do consulting in this space, what do you think about the fact that maybe the leadership in firms should not be from the technical professional ranks, but should have other types of expertise? I'm starting to see that in some different firms.
There have been firms that did it, and there have been a few that are successful firms. It's very difficult to do, though. I mean, the line staff, rank and file, they want to work for somebody that they can identify with. And so I think it's very difficult. I'd love to say, yeah, it's great. We need to get people from outside the AE business. We should make all our CFOs and marketing heads or non-technical or non-designers the CEOs. But in fact, it doesn't work out that well most of the time, in my experience. There are some exceptions. But it's hard for those other people. It's hard to motivate those other people if they don't think you've been there like them doing what they do for whatever reason. That's been my experience. I mean, I saw, you know, some years back, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, SOM, a lot of you know who they are, you know. They went outside the industry. They had this long search process. I don't think any of the partners got along well enough to pick one of their own for the job, even though as a several thousand person company, you would have thought they had some real talent there that could do it. So they go get this guy. He worked at GE. And excuse me, he worked for, what was the, I want to say Westinghouse. What was the name of that guy who was so popular, management, pop psychology, pop literature, anyway. So they were all excited because this guy, it wasn't Chainsaw L. Dunlop, but it was somebody else that is frequently quoted as a management expert. Who are you thinking of? Jack Welch. That's it. That's what I was thinking of. GE. Okay, yeah, that's right. This guy worked for Jack Welch. And so, oh, he worked for Jack Welch. He knows everything about business. You know, we're going to get this guy. That guy lasted less than a year. I mean, he got shot in the back by those architects. They had no respect for him at all. Okay? I mean, seriously, it's hard. It's real hard doing it if you're not one of them. Yes. Aaron?
From an M&A perspective, they reconcile the desire to realize like the strategic and creative value of bringing in a firm with the need to be appropriately conservative in your financial analysis of what that's going to look like in the macro scheme. How do you quantify like that on the side that looks so great, but hard to put your finger on that?
It's hard. I'm not sure you can quantify it. I think some of it has to be intuition. Because the truth is, you should get some synergy, even though people hate that term. It's not just buying this company and we stick it out there and everything stays the same, and whatever it does adds and whatever it doesn't do subtracts. It's just not that simple. You know, you have to use your experience and knowledge, and that means you take a risk. You make an educated guess. You know, most entrepreneurs don't really take a lot of risk. They feel pretty good about their analysis of the situation, but it's not all numbers. I don't know what else you can say. Although, you know me, I mean, I'm a big fan of buying cheap companies. I really am. I love cheap companies because I think they're easier to pay for. So I'm dead serious. I mean, you buy a good company, you pay a lot of money for it. The odds are the people are going to be less motivated. Either the owners are going to be less motivated because now they got a lot of money, or the employees will be less motivated because they perceive their opportunities have been cut off. Either way, they're going to be less motivated in many cases, so things don't work out. And then that long payback period gets even longer. If it's got some problems and you can come in and help those people, they got bad marketing, they don't have enough cash to pay their bills, They got an old fart owner who's sucking off the teat of the mothership and not contributing, and you can get them out of the way with this transaction, then it makes a lot more sense. But you're not overpaying for it either, because it's got a problem and everybody recognizes it. So that's why I like the problem companies. But I think in some of these small companies, you just have to feel good. How do you know if I hire somebody for 200 grand a year, they're going to work out? I don't know that. I mean, in a sense, some of these small acquisitions are just like an expensive hire. You just have to have a feeling that it's going to work out. And sometimes you're right and sometimes you're not. Hopefully you're right more than you're not. Ryan, you had something?
Yeah, two questions.
Okay.
What's the bull barn, first of all?
I don't know. I can't tell you, but I bet it plays some really cool songs. Most of these do.
More serious question.
Uh,
In your 38 years, what would you say are the top 2 or 3 things that you've seen change in the industry, how the industry has changed? And then, is that any guidance for moving forward over the next 30 years?
Well, the top 2 or 3 things, I think the development of the marketing function. I mean, really, when I started, marketing had just sort of become allowed. I mean, really, it was against the credos in the 70s of architecture and engineering. You couldn't really market. So marketing as a discipline was a new thing when I started out. My boss, my first job was head of project development because he didn't like the word marketing. And he said, stay in the back room so nobody even sees you're here. I mean, seriously, that's the way he talked to me. And so I was thrown in with a bunch of asbestos abatement technicians. You know, there were 7 of us in one giant cubicle with a phone on the pole. And when your wife called you, you had to go walk to the pole. And of course, then you were, you know, subject to scrutiny. But I think the big changes, I mean, we see business knowledge as valuable. 38 years ago, it really wasn't. You know, my first mentor in this business was a guy named Irving Weiss, and he worked for, his company was called Pickering, Wooten, Smith, and Weiss, and then Pickering later in Memphis, and I ended up going to work there. He was a client of mine first for 3 years, and then I went to work for him in 1983. But Irv, he went through and got his MBA from Memphis State, an executive MBA program. He said, can you imagine what would happen if we applied modern management techniques to an AE firm? Gee, maybe we could do okay, you know? Like we do marketing and we do business planning and stuff like that. I mean, that was completely unheard of. So just really the integration of business knowledge to what used to be just professional practice type operations, I think has transformed the industry. People do a lot better today as a result of that.
You see that moving forward, the same 2 things, but on a...
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's really exciting. I mean, what I see in this business is firms opening up to other services that are not AE services, realizing that the value of these businesses is they have really great client relationships with some very high-level people who could buy a lot more stuff than what we're currently selling them. And then I think the money people are starting to figure out, you know what? If the average return on equity is 69%, or 86% or 49%, and it usually runs somewhere in there. This is a pretty damn good business. We got to start looking at some of these. So the money starts to flow to it. So I think that's going to be transformational. Then we can do more, maybe more experimental stuff. So I think our future is really bright, even though we may not just be grinding out plans and specs the same way we always did, and employing lots of people to do stuff sort of the dumb way, because we get paid that way, you know, for grinding hours against the job. I think that's going to change. But I think you can see it right now. The people in this room are making more money than they ever have. You know, the revenue per employee, we just saw average is 150 plus, somewhere in there, and good firms, 185,000 per head. That's a big change for this business. Yes? Yep.
Draw plans, build stuff, design stuff, but, so being in the people business for 38 years, do you see a difference in workforce and the workplace industry is the largest industry there is? You know, in any pastor, you know,
Sure. Right.
so do you see a difference in firms who are kingdom building firms and how they treat their employees versus those who are just focused on the dollars?
I don't know that I can, well, I don't know that I looked at one versus the other, but I will say this. You got to treat your people well or they leave. I mean, everybody has free will. So no one is stuck working for you. If you abuse people, if you treat people with disrespect, if you don't pay people properly, they will leave. So, I think one of the things I see, to go back to the other industries and small businesses, they basically believe nobody should make any money but themselves. Now, there are some AE firms that operate like that too. I'll never forget, I had this client once, he was in Virginia, it was a great story. Had a very successful environmental consulting firm, had about 120 employees. By the time he calls me, he's got 30 employees. So it's going straight down the shitter. So I start looking at the numbers in this place, and you know what I find out? The top paid person in the company, now keep in mind, this was the 1990s, made $70,000 a year. He was paying himself $380,000. We couldn't afford to pay $380,000. So I said, look, Bob, whatever his name was, I said, we can't pay you $380,000 a year. Everybody's going to go, you're going to be done. But I need $380,000. What do you mean you need that? Well, I need $180,000 a year to live on, and then my cattle farm loses $200,000 a year. So I have to get $380,000. I said, look, nobody here cares about your cattle farm. Okay, soon you're going to be getting $0 a year. Not 180, not 380, nothing. And he did, of course, eventually fail because he wouldn't listen to me. So the greed factor, it is a factor. Money is not everything, but it sure makes people feel better and feel like you care about them. And so you can't be too cheap. You do have to talk to people. I mean, it's all stuff we know. I think a lot of it is just don't create a two-class society. If you look at AE firms, the biggest problem we have is the owners all hang out with each other. Owners go out to lunch together all the time. They go to the nice restaurants. They charge it to the company credit card. Everybody else is out there friggin' ordering in Jimmy John's and running down to, Subway, feeling like shit after they eat that. And then the owners come back in their company cars and park in the reserved spots after they just had a $100 lunch for 3 of them. And, you expect people to feel good doing that? I mean, that's, or the ridiculous palatial offices I see in some cases for the owners versus other people. I think back, there was an architecture firm that was based in New York and Albany. I went there. They had a building. It had 5 floors. In the middle was an elevator and stair core, and then it was on a hillside. So there were these 5 floors here, and then the other 5 were slightly below the 5 that were uphill. And so everybody was packed in like sardines into this building, except for the executive level, which was, of course, in the higher tower at the top floor. 3 guys, 3 secretaries. Okay, morale was horrible. And, you go, well, they shouldn't care about that. That's always the way it is. We always had those. We had those offices before the place got that crowded. There's any number of bullshit excuses. But the point is, it makes people feel bad, small, second class. I think we all have to think about these things all the time. Anything you can do to get rid of those kinds of things that make people feel that way is probably in your best interest. Yeah, Mike?
So, 10 years ago, probably this month,
Mm-hmm.
Lehman Brothers failed, the Great Recession began.
Yeah.
Extraordinarily traumatic to our industry. We've healed, we've recovered, but certainly the impression of that has lingering effects. How do you see that, and what's good or bad about lingering effects of the Great Recession that's manifesting itself even now?
As much as I hate to say it, I don't think we learned our lesson. I say we repeat all the same mistakes over again. Every single one of them is going to be made again because the banks are lending money on crazy projects and developers are doing stupid. I'm a developer. I got too much real estate right now myself. Too many projects under construction, not enough I can sell. And it's a good economy because you get hooked. It's like, that's a deal, that's a deal, that's a deal. Wait a minute, I got too many deals here now. I think it's all going to happen again. The banks are lending money. It's crazy. You go in, I don't know if I ever told you, I bought 16 condos about 5 years ago. So the bank president comes up to me, I'm at the bank, he goes, Mark, I got some condos I want to sell you. I said, where are they? He told me, I said, I'm not interested. He said, oh, yes, you are. I'm going to make you such a good deal that you're going to buy these condos from me. 4 days later, I owned 16 condos. I walked out with a check for $102,500. Okay, I walked out of the bank with $102,500 in cash. Do you think you're going to have a problem again? Guarantee. And they were under the scrutiny of the federal banking authorities for lending too much money out to people. But they couldn't get rid of that property. They wanted to get rid of that property worse than they wanted to have a loan that the feds would look at with, suspiciously. So I think we're going to make all the same mistakes, as much as I wish that weren't the case. I say get ready, because it'll happen again, but it won't necessarily be the same thing. There could be other things that happen. I mean, if anything good came out of it, we tightened our belts, maybe we diversified. We learned to be a little bit more fleet. Maybe we've got those early warning indicator systems set up, and we'll be maybe a little more willing to listen to the indicators when we see that they're starting to go the other way. But I think it's happening again. Yeah, Steve?
Well, where do you see the economy go? Everybody sees that structure, the federal government,
I don't know. I mean, I'm concerned. I wish I was more bullish than I am. I mean, it is really strong right now. There's no question about it. Exactly. I know. I mean, honestly, I think the greater the division between the haves and the have-nots, eventually the haves won't have a market for their stuff, because the have-nots won't have any money to buy it, and then you're going to have a problem. So that's kind of what I see, honestly. Yes?
What advice can you give us today to prepare for that next downturn? I mean, we're growing like crazy.
Yeah.
We're hiring like crazy. We're spending lots of money on marketing. What should we be doing today to prepare?
Well, first off, I don't think that just because you have a recession doesn't mean any one company necessarily has to go backwards, because I saw companies during the recession do better and better and better and better. So it also represents opportunities for you too. Realize that. But have your early warning signs in place. How many people here track web hits every single month, put it on a graph month by month, and see if it's trending up or down, and share that with all employees? I got one. Better start doing it. You need early warning indicators. That tells you if people are out there looking for AE services. I sit there every day. The first thing I do is I get a report from Zillow of all the new listings, because I buy a lot of properties. Okay, I bought 2 houses in the last 2 weeks. But I sit, and so you know what I'm seeing now? I'm seeing a lot of price reduction, price reduction, price reduction, price reduction. That's starting to scare me, as much as I hate to admit it. So get your indicators in place. How many proposals are you making? How much, what's your hit rate? There are some early warning indicators out there, building permits, what's happening in the marketplace. Track it. Look very, very closely at it, and don't ignore it. You may see it and go, yeah, but. Okay? Don't do that. If it starts going the other way, start slowing up on your hiring. That's probably the first thing I do. Continue to weed out the duds. Maybe save a little bit of money. Don't spend it all on bonuses this time. Put some of that cash away and pay tax if you have to. I mean, I think there's some things you got to do to tighten it up a little bit, so you'll be a little bit better off. When the times get bad, whoever's got some dry powder out there is going to be able to buy companies really cheap and get some good people. That's a great time to grow. So for me in the real estate business, it was a great opportunity, obviously. That's when I started buying stuff. Think about it. Buy when everybody's selling, sell when everybody's buying. That old adage. Yes, Chris?
I've never heard you talk about ESOPs. So when are they good ideas for firms and when are they bad ideas?
Well, the thing about ESOPs are good if you've got a big founder or big shareholder and you want to take that person out, and a tax preferred basis. They can be very good for that. I was at Ellerby Beckett when we were 100% ESOP. I was on their board, and we didn't like it. It got to where nobody owned the company. Because if you're an owner and you own shares in an ESOP trust through your pension or profit sharing plan, that's not the same as owning the shares. You own shares in the trust owns the company. So when everybody has these fractional ownerships, SEPI's got 0.7% and it's worth $23,000 and the value goes up by 20% next year. So now she's got 26.6 in her account. It's not life-changing for her. She's probably not going to want to make the sacrifices that she really needs to make to grow that company. I prefer to have some of the ownership concentrated in some people who could really have something if the place does well. I don't think it's quite the panacea. The ESOP advocates, though, are like religious fanatics. They can't consider anything else. They want to put an ESOP in every single company, and they'll tell you everybody's going to be more productive, and they make an average of 1% more profit or whatever than non-ESOP companies. I don't think it necessarily applies in this industry the same way it might if we were manufacturing bicycle wheels or something. I think it's a different kind of culture there. So
Thoughts on that concentration of ownership and have
you have to make sure that just because they have ownership doesn't make them lords, doesn't make them unaccountable, doesn't mean they have to follow the same rules or work hard, doesn't mean they get all the perks and benefits. They just have the ownership. It can go up or down if the place performs well. If they make a lot of money, they can get a profit distribution that's commensurate with their share of ownership because they took risk and they've, that's the way I look at it. And if times are bad, they're the first ones to cut. So I don't think it has to be a bad thing, but I do think it tends to be because people don't deal with it properly. That's my best answer for that. Yes, Jared?
So, our industry is being disrupted right now by technology. All this intelligence, everybody talks about that now. I've heard comments that all of our companies in this room will either become tech firms or general contractors. Speak to maybe some of those mega trends that you're seeing in our industry. Excited about maybe?
The evidence isn't there. I mean, because as an industry, we just keep doing better and better. So, I mean, you hear these things and you hear people talk about it, but if you look at our performance, we all need people. We all got more work to do than we can do, and our revenue per employee is going up, and we're very profitable. So the signs don't really show that we're being threatened by some of those things that we do talk about. If we all have to be contractors, we ought to just give up right now. Because here's my experience, and personal included. We are horrible at it. I am a licensed general contractor. I have an unlimited license. I can build anything, commercial, institutional, residential, whatever. And you know what? I was totally unequipped for the contracting world. It's an outlaw industry. You're dealing with people who don't mind breaking the law every single day and doing things. And we come out of this ethical background that we come out of, and we get eaten alive. We don't go out there and beat on people the way they do. So it's very, very hard for us. AE firms, typically, when they go into at-risk construction, they have so many problems with it. I can't tell you how many companies I've worked with that, we tried that. Oh, God. We did 2 design-build projects, where we were the prime. We're never going to do that again. So we don't do very well with it. There are obviously a few exceptions. That said, I think we can be professional service providers. I just don't know that we're necessarily going to do the same thing we did. And sure, I mean, isn't it kind of silly that we have to keep designing schools over and over and over again? Everyone's a new, fresh 100-yard dash. I mean, aren't there really some things that we could figure out are sort of the best way to design a classroom and then do that over and over and maybe side adapt that? I mean, I think we do some kind of stupid stuff, really. And so we deserve those kinds of jobs are going to go away. But there's still a lot of stuff that's needed that AE firms do. A computer can't do all of it. Somebody's got to get out there and really figure out what the needs really are, you know? And a computer can't do that. It may be able to do some of the production, but there are a lot of needs. There are a lot of problems. You know, clean air, clean water, affordable housing. I mean, transportation systems are going to completely change. We all know that. Whether it's electric cars, everything's changing. So I think there's going to be a lot of needs. And there's a pent-up demand just for repair and fixing all the stuff that's already out there, which is also not really a good place to, you know, take some brain power. Can't automate all that. You know, when you start talking about fixing what's already there, it's not a clean sheet of paper. So I'm pretty bullish, I think, on the long-term future. Our business isn't going to go away, I don't think. Anybody else out there? Yes, Chris. I'm a big fan of complete open book management on everything other than who makes how much money. As soon as somebody else finds out that somebody else makes $2,000 more than they do, they're all pissed off. They could have been perfectly happy until then. So I'm a big, big believer in the open book management, educating the employees on how the place makes money or loses money, what's working, who's making money, who isn't. I think that's the way you have accountability. When it's all based on, well, I'm going to look at your numbers and nobody else sees them, and then I need to call you in and I need to give you trouble if you're not doing it, system will break down every time. Managers will never do that. And people don't care, or they do it, but there's no consequences. Where I work at the University of Arkansas, it's a great example. Get online, look at ratemyprofessors.com. Okay? I'm dead serious. We have, you're rated on a scale of 0 to 5. We have some professors that have a rating of 1.3 out of 5. They are adjuncts, meaning they are hired every year just to teach a class. And they're still there. So, and you know, maybe their performance appraisal sucks. You know, don't think, by the way, the dean doesn't look at that, because I turned him on to it. He's like, holy cow. So you look, I was going back and forth via email, and then suddenly it switched to text. Why do you think that happened? Okay, because he wanted to say some stuff he didn't want recorded. He said, oh man, there's 2 problems there I just took care of. He was gone for like 15 minutes from our conversation and came back. No consequences at all from bad. So if your whole idea is all my managers hold people accountable, it's all bullshit. It will never happen. Make the numbers hold people accountable and the peer pressure. Far better. I don't like giving people negative feedback, do you? I don't think most people do. So put it out there so it's obvious that they're not doing their job. I think it's a much healthier way to do it. Drives the performance of everybody up. Now, of course, it also forces you to do your job. I mean, if it continues to look bad and you don't do anything about it, then you're in trouble. Maybe if you're in trouble, you'll take action. Of course, the biggest problem today is the reason we don't get rid of duds is we don't have anybody better to replace them with, and we're all overloaded. That's the truth of it. So we tolerate non-performers. And, you know, Chad touched on that, but it's a huge problem. You can't do it. You've got to ramp up your recruiting investment, and you don't spend any money on recruiting, as we know. 70-some-odd% have no recruiting budget. So you don't build up the supply line. I used to call that supply side human resources management, to steal a term from Reagan, President Reagan. Supply side HR says, ramp up supply, you'll deal with your current staff a lot differently. You'll be a lot tougher and a lot more demanding. But no supply, everybody that shows up is a warm body. It's somebody's job I don't have to do. And I sure as hell don't need another one. I don't know about any of you. I got enough jobs to do right now. So, anybody else have anything you want? Yeah, John?
What is your take on the best way to start getting more labor force into the business? It's obviously not a problem not to solve.
Yeah.
Tomorrow or next week, but what is your philosophy?
Co-ops and interns. Co-ops and interns. We got to get them before they go into the other industries that hire these people. Co-ops and interns. The sooner we get them working for us, it doesn't have to be a structured program from the university. We can just go hire people part-time if we want to, but give them a progressive experience, give them a little taste, and then we'll get some of them, they'll stay with us. It's the only answer that I know of right now. And the fact is, the data shows that people who co-opt and interned last on their first job about 2.5 times longer than people who did not. Because they don't have that shock, like, holy cow, I thought I'd be designing the Golden Gate Bridge, and instead all I'm doing is detailing cable connections on, whatever. Cable tray supports in a power plant or some damn thing. Okay, that's not serious structural engineering. I mean, this is what happens. But if they get a little taste of it early on, then they're much more realistic later, and they know what we're all about, and they start to appreciate some of the other aspects of our business aside from just high starting pay. I think people don't know how well people do in this industry, John. When I hear these people say, oh, engineers don't make any money, and whatever. And I've taught in the School of Architecture too, and that was alluded to, about Noah's professor saying you'll never make over whatever. You can't make any money in this business. Sure, they all do that, but I used to just roll in people that made $5 million a year in front of my students who are architects, who are clients of mine, and that sort of changed the tune a little bit. Get some examples out there of some people who do well. It's terrible when we talk badly about our own profession. I was at an NSPE career awareness seminar in Austin, Texas once, and there was one of the top guys at Sverdrup and Parcell was there. Any of you remember Sverdrup in St. Louis? They were an old line company. It was run by military. General Sverdrup was a general who started it. Anyway, a pretty good sized company, and so they had representatives from all the various sort of career paths that engineers could go into, higher education, government, industry, consulting. Can't remember, there was one more. And so they all got to talk a little bit, and then there were students from all 50 states. This was a national meeting, who are the top students who belong to NSPE in their respective states. They were there. And the Sverdrup guy gets up, he says, if you ever want to drive a Cadillac, don't go into this business. And I thought, what an asshole. So when I got up there, I said, hey, look, I just want everybody to know I work for Carter and Burgess, and I'm driving a brand new Porsche outside. Come on out and see it. Okay, I mean, that makes me sound like an asshole, but there was a point to it. Okay, the point was you can do okay in this business, and that's a terrible thing to say to people. So so we turn off all the best and brightest right away with this bitter old negative guy who doesn't do well himself or whatever and is pissed off at the world. It's terrible. Yes, Kevin?
What are your thoughts or any concerns with respect to all the significant acquisitions that are going on, the consolidation of all the engineering firms, or IT firms that are getting bigger and bigger and bigger? Any concerns or issues with that?
I mean, I don't see that necessarily as a bad thing. I think we're getting better about how we buy these companies. So, I'm happy for the entrepreneurs that founded these companies or own them and are willing to and are able to cash in on their sacrifices when they have these external sales, and hopefully that's why. But, of course, I think as a company, the concern is cultural fragmentation, poor client service. I think there are many risks to all those acquisitions. People don't know what our values are. They do things differently. We let them go on and do things differently, maybe, and they aren't doing them so well. People get lost in the shuffle. We get too big. We don't treat our clients like we used to. There's no personal connection. So I think for the large enterprises, there's a risk. To a certain extent, they get vulnerable. And they also can get very bureaucratic. The larger you get, the more people we have on our board, the more decision-making bogs down. That makes us not so fleet. and able to respond to changes out there in the marketplace. But on the other hand, there are some clients that only want to deal with mega companies. They see them as less risky. They can serve all their needs in all their locations. So I don't think it's necessarily a good or a bad thing, honestly. Anybody else out there? Steve, yes, one last question. Man, that's true. I mean, we need trade schools so badly. And the thing is, it's looked down on. Today, everybody thinks I've either got to get a degree and have a job that pays me $100,000 or I work at McDonald's. And there's nothing in between. And the fact is that there's this huge shortage, but the trade schools are going out of business. Maybe some of us need to start some new trade schools because there are some great jobs out there. I mean, we had carpenters making $120,000 a year living in Fayetteville, Arkansas that were shitty carpenters. So it's not like there's no good jobs out there, but there's nobody to do them, as you said. So it's terrible. I mean, that's one thing that unions do well is they do provide apprenticeship programs. So if I was in St. Louis, I could call down to Union Hall and they'd send me somebody that, in theory, is reasonably competent because they've been through an apprenticeship program. So I don't know what else to, in Europe, it's not unfashionable to say, well, in 10th grade or whatever, we make the decision, we're going to trade school, we're going to university. I think it's, in our culture, it's looked down on, and it's a shame. I think that's what this guy with the dirty jobs, Mike, whatever his name is, that's his big thing he pushes out there is, we need people to do these jobs. They're important. They're not all stupid people. And there's some good jobs. They're just different. Not everybody's geared to do white-collar work. Some people are good with their hands. Doesn't mean we'd all be good plumbers either. My plumber makes over $200 a year, though. Okay? So he does okay. He's really good at what he does. So, all right, thanks, everybody. We'll see you at the next session.